For future reference in future weekly fantasy sit start videos, I encourage you to inbox me on YouTube your questions on who you should sit or who you should start. So if you have questions about who you should play at your flex position or who you should play as your team defense, your wide receiver, or your second running back, whatever the case might be. If you are having trouble making up your mind, then by all means feel free to inbox me on YouTube, and I'll do the best I can to answer everyone's questions in the weekly fantasy football sit start video. I would recommend that you get those questions submitted probably like Saturday at noon, so that way you make sure that I'm actually able to answer them in the video that'll go up that Saturday night or Sunday morning, just for your own future reference. But let's talk now about week 3 and who I think you should sit and start in terms of fantasy football. And then afterwards, I'm going to talk about some guys that you should be paying attention to on the waiver wire, guys that could potentially step in and help you right now, and those guys that you need to keep your eye on later in the year that could help you at that most critical time, the fantasy football playoffs. So let's start off with the quarterbacks and look at the guys you should sit first, or consider sitting at the very least. Russell Wilson of the Seahawks taking on the Jags at home at Qwest Field. Most people are probably assuming, and rightfully so, that this is going to be a big, nasty blowout. As a result, you have to temper your expectations for Russell Wilson. He might not play the entire game, or the Seahawks might just be able to run the ball and beat the Jags by 35 points. As a result, how much production is Russell Wilson really going to give you? Consider that. Big Ben of the Pittsburgh Steelers taking on the Chicago Bears in the Sunday night game. The Steelers' offense looks very bad right now. Big Ben is not putting up big numbers by any stretch of the imagination. You need to consider starting somebody else. Tom Brady, this is kind of a wild card here, and it almost feels kind of sacrilegious to say it, but the Patriots' offense has not been that good the first 2 weeks. It has not looked that good at all. Gronkowski's still not back, and they really don't have much in the passing game. Let's be realistic here. So you have to temper your expectations right now for Tom Brady and the Patriots offense and how many points he's going to put up. And going against a Buccaneers defense that is at the very least solid, Brady might struggle to put up decent numbers in week number 3. So, yeah, for 1 week, you might want to consider sitting him. Quarterbacks you should consider starting in week number 3. Colin Kaepernick of the 49ers taking on the Colts. The Colts defense is easily nowhere near the Seahawks defense. I expect Kaepernick to rebound and have a nice game in week number 3. Ryan Tannehill of the Miami Dolphins playing the Falcons at home in Miami. The Dolphins are 2-0 with 2 road wins. Now they get to play them at home. They get the Falcons, whose defense is suspect to say the very least. Their secondary is not all that good. And Tannehill has looked all right the first 2 weeks of the year. As a result, I expect Tannehill to put up some surprisingly good numbers in week number 3. Would I go on record and say I think he's going to have a better game than for sure at least Big Ben Roethlisberger? Oh, fuck yeah. And the thing is, Tannehill's available on a lot of waiver wires right now. Joe Flacco of the Baltimore Ravens taking on the Houston Texans. Without Ray Rice, it looks like Flacco's going to have to throw even more. As a result, he might have a chance to put up some good numbers against a Texan secondary that is less than stellar. Okie dokie, cowpokes. Let's move on to the running backs. So let's go with David Wilson. He's one you should definitely sit. Until I tell you otherwise, sit David Wilson every week. Got it? Good. Daryl Richardson, another one to sit for the Rams going against the Cowboys. This guy right now, he looks like most weeks he's going to give you 60 yards rushing, maybe 30 yards receiving. Doesn't give you that much value in PPR leagues. Looks like he'll struggle to score touchdowns. So he's just a very weak flex running back play, frankly. You could find better. Frank Gore of the San Francisco 49ers going against the Colts is another running back you should sit because, frankly, in 2 weeks he really hasn't shown you much of anything. Hasn't shown me much of anything. Again, there's probably better out there, even though the Colts defense is a little bit weaker than the Seattle Seahawks, that's for sure. Another running back to sit in week number 3 is going to be Ahmad Bradshaw of the Colts taking on the San Francisco 49ers. And that's because of the surprising, shocking, good for Indianapolis Trent Richardson trade. So I'm assuming Richardson will start. If he doesn't, he's at least going to get a lion's share of carries, meaning Bradshaw's touches are going to be very limited. And you're better off looking in another place for some fantasy points out of one of your running back positions. Running backs to consider starting. Bernard Pierce of the Ravens taking on the Texans. It looks like Ray Rice will be out. Pierce is a talented back. he moves into that feature back role for week 3, he could have a very, very nice day, frankly. Jason Snelling of the Atlanta Falcons taking on the Miami Dolphins. Not that he'll necessarily put up huge numbers, but Snelling is a guy that gets some action on third downs. He's a guy that gets a lot of the goal line carries. So with Steven Jackson being out this week, Snelling could get 50 yards and sneak out a goal line touchdown, give you a couple of catches, and he's a nice flex position play for you if nothing else. Jock Bell of the Detroit Lions. You look at him and you say, you know what? Bush is out most likely. Bell gets some opportunities on third down, so he's a 3-down back. He also gets the goal line carry, so he has the potential to have a very nice day. So now we move on to wide receivers, and those first that you should consider sitting in week number 3. Roddy White of the Atlanta Falcons taking on the Miami Dolphins. Roddy White's probably going to be limited again, used as little more than decoy. Might catch 1 ball, might catch 2 balls. Sucks if you drafted Roddy White because you took him in round 2 or 3 or maybe 4, depending on the size of your league. And you're looking at him as being a guy, a top 10 fantasy wide receiver that should be producing you a lot of points. He's producing you nothing right now. Don't panic. Don't overreact. Just stay patient with him. But in the meantime, don't get stuck with him in your lineup if you don't have to and run the risk of him giving you 0 or 1 points. Lance Moore of the New Orleans Saints. He's a frustrating guy because he'll sit there 3 weeks and he'll catch like 2 or 3 balls or 1 ball, and then he'll have one huge game where he goes for like 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. Lance Moore is a guy that his numbers at the end of the year, they might look okay, but he's very frustrating to own in fantasy football because of the way Drew Brees spreads the ball around in the New Orleans Saints offense. Sit Lance Moore. He hasn't done anything the first 2 weeks. Make him show you something. Antonio Brown of the Pittsburgh Steelers taking on the Chicago Bears. Not only does the Steelers offense look bad, they're going against the Chicago Bears defense that has a tandem of corners that, in an all-around basis, may be arguably the best in the NFL in Peanut Tillman and Tim Jennings. Not a good matchup for Antonio Brown. Sit him. Wide receivers to consider starting. Tavon Austin of the St. Louis Rams taking on the Dallas Cowboys. Austin had a bit of a breakout game last week. Went under the radar a little bit. Went for 2 touchdown catches in the second half. Maybe that's the sign of life that we were looking for out of Austin, indicating that he is going to have an explosive type of season in 2013 still to come. In the meantime, it looks like him and Sam Bradford in week number 2 established a little bit of a better rapport, a little bit better connection. As a result, I look at Tavon Austin going against a so-so Dallas Cowboys secondary. He could have a nice game in week number 3. Kendall Wright of the Tennessee Titans. I look at his matchup against the Chargers. I say, again, the Chargers are a so-so defensive unit. Jake Locker seems to trust throwing the ball to Kendall Wright. If they get into the red zone, Kendall Wright does seem to get some targets, seems to occasionally vulture out a touchdown. And with Kenny Britt being a big disappointment so far, it looks like Kendall Wright could get more opportunities very, very soon, and they might come as soon as week 3. And then Brian Hartline of the Miami Dolphins taking on the Atlanta Falcons. Again, the Falcons secondary is very questionable. Their defense as a whole is kind of questionable. If they key on a Mike Walls, it could mean a lot of catches, a lot of opportunities, and a big day for Miami's number 2 wide receiver, Hartline. Tight ends to consider sitting in week number 3. We'll go with Rob Gronkowski of the New England Patriots. He might be healthy enough to play, probably won't play, but even if somehow at the last minute Belichick pulls a fast one on everyone and does play him, I don't know how effective Gronkowski is going to be just yet. If you've got him on your bench, just stay patient. You've got maybe another week to go, and you're going to get Gronk back, and at some point in time, you'll probably put up some Gronk-like numbers. So stay with it, but don't take the chance this week of getting stuck with a 0 in your lineup. Jordan Cameron of the Cleveland Browns. It's hard for me to sit there and tell you to bench him at this point because he's had a couple of really nice games, but the fact of the matter is they've got Hoyer going at quarterback this week for Cleveland, going against a solid Minnesota defense. Now, it does not seem to be a good matchup on paper, either for the quarterback that's throwing him the ball or the defense that he's matching up with. Even though Martellus Bennett did very well against the Vikings in week number 2, Jordan Cameron has Brian Hoyer throwing him the ball. Not the best of conditions for a tight end to be successful. And Jermaine Gresham of the Cincinnati Bengals taking on the Green Bay Packers. Eifert's getting more opportunities, it seems like. I think Eifert's going to surpass Gresham on the depth chart at some point. He's going to be a more featured part of the offense, which means fewer opportunities for Jermaine Gresham. In terms of tight ends to start, we'll look at Tyler Eifert of the Cincinnati Bengals. I think he's been the more impressive of the 2 tight ends right now. I think flat out he's a more talented, more complete tight end than Jermaine Gresham is. And I think he's going to have a better rapport with Andy Dalton, meaning more opportunities and more targets. And he might be worth a start against Green Bay in week number 3, who traditionally does have trouble matching up with opposing teams' tight ends. When you look at other tight ends to start, You could also sit there and say Martellus Bennett is almost a must start at this point until proven otherwise. With 3 touchdown catches in 2 weeks and the sheer skill level that he's displayed with some of those touchdown catches, it's been incredibly impressive. He's definitely somebody that is worth you starting in your Week 3 lineup if you are so lucky as to have him on your team. I've made up a list here since we're a couple of weeks into the fantasy season. It's not panic time yet. And if you're sitting there desperately looking for running backs and wide receivers already, chances are you're not going anywhere anyways because you drafted very poorly or you made some dumb roster moves, some dumb trades, whatever the case might be. But it's always important to remember that most fantasy teams, even the really good ones, even the owners that draft really, really well, they've always made a couple of roster changes throughout the year. You almost never keep the same exact roster intact that you started off the year with your draft. That's just the way it goes. And, guys that start off the year hot may finish the year cold. And it's those guys that didn't play the first few weeks of the season that come on like gangbusters the last 4 or 5 weeks of the year that help fantasy owners win fantasy championships. So I'll give you some players at a few different positions to look at and, keep these guys in mind. Some of them might contribute right now for you, and some of them might be ones to watch down the road. Like right now, I think Ryan Tannehill is somebody that you should consider giving a roster spot to, especially if you have a second-level quarterback that you're kind of about. Tannehill, I think, is going to have a very good year on a solid Miami Dolphins team. He's worth a look at this point. A quarterback for later on in the year to really keep your eye on perhaps is E.J. Manuel. I'm a big E.J. Manuel fan. I think he's a very talented guy, has the ability to do things both with his arm and his feet. Just somebody to keep your eye on for later on in the year. Running backs now. You've got James Starks of the Packers, Willis McGahee of the Cleveland Browns now, and Felix Jones of the Pittsburgh Steelers. You look at Starks, Lacey's not going to play for a couple of weeks, so Starks is going to get some opportunities, some carries. If you're looking for a running back and he's on your waiver wire or on your bench, or on your waiver wire at least, I should say, he's worth a pickup at least for the next couple of weeks to help get you by. Willis McGahee of the Cleveland Browns, it's either going to be him or maybe that Rainey kid that are going to be the starters. Either way, McGahee's going to get touches. In particular, he's going to get goal line touches. Even if the Browns don't score a lot of touchdowns, they're going to score a few touchdowns. You just happen into them in the NFL, and McGahee's going to get some of those goal line carries, no question about it. Felix Jones of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I have said already that the Pittsburgh Steelers offense is not good, and that is true. However, right now he's getting the most carries. As a result, if you're looking for a starting running back who maybe you get lucky and he has a monster week, go after Felix Jones. Running backs to pay attention to for later in the year. These are the guys that aren't playing right now or aren't getting much attention right now that could be difference makers for you later on in the year. You've got Jonathan Stewart of the Carolina Panthers, Le'Veon Bell of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Both of those guys are hurt. When they come back, they're going to get some touches, and they may end up being feature backs before all said and done. The other guy, dark horse to keep your eye on, is Andre Ellington of the Arizona Cardinals. He gets some change of pace looks for Rashard Mendenhall. He gets some third down looks as a change of pace back. He could end up getting more of a workload as the season goes along. Just keep an eye on that. Wide receivers, you got guys like Robert Woods, the rookie out of USC with the Buffalo Bills. Stephen Hill, the second-year guy out of Georgia Tech with the New York Jets. You've got Josh Gordon coming back from his 2-game suspension for the Cleveland Browns. These are all receivers right now and run a lot of leagues, waiver wires, that are worth the pickup that could potentially, especially in the case of somebody like Josh Gordon, come in and be a very nice addition to your fantasy lineup. Some wide receivers to keep your eyes on for the future. I'm going to go with guys like Percy Harvin and Justin Blackmon. I know in a lot of leagues they were drafted, but some leagues they were not. Those two guys there, they're going to come back. And when they come back, they could be guys that, make a difference for you. They were guys that otherwise, without Harvin's injury or with Blackman's suspension, would have been drafted much higher. As a result, they were on your waiver wire. You picked them up, you dropped some other slug off your damn roster, and they might come in on a given week and give you 15 or 20 points and help you win and advance in the fantasy playoffs or win a fantasy championship. It's guys like these that can make a big difference, especially if you have the ability now to hide him on your bench and eat up a roster spot for it. Or a guy like Cordell Patterson. He's too big, he's too athletic, he's too talented for the Vikings and those dumb dicks to not figure out at some point, hey, he's 6'4" and he can fucking fly. Let's throw him the ball a few times down the field. Oh, create a few wide receiver screens, see what the hell happens. No excuse, just ridiculous. Tight ends, keep your eye on. Zach Ertz of the Philadelphia Eagles. Brandon Pettigrew of the Detroit Lions. Tyler Eifert of the Cincinnati Bengals. These are all guys that probably aren't owned in a lot of leagues, that are available on your waiver wire, that if you're unsure about your tight end or he's kind of shaky, these are guys that I think you could pick up right now and could can contribute for you. I know Pettigrew hasn't had a great start to the year, but I think he'll get better as the year goes along. Ertz is a talented rookie. I like him. I think he's going to fit well in Chip Kelly's system. And then Tyler Eifert, I think, is going to surpass Jermaine Gresham as the #1 tight end in Cincinnati very quickly. A couple other tight ends to keep your eye on in the future. Later on in the season, Jordan Reed of the Washington Redskins. I think he's going to continue to take more snaps and more targets away from Fred Davis and might eventually take over for him. And Garrett Graham of the Houston Texans. He's a guy right there with Owen Daniels, who's had knee problems in the past and other injury problems in the past. If Owen Daniels goes down, Garrett Graham steps in. He gets some targets, especially in the red zone, as a #2 tight end now. As a #1 tight end, that would mean more targets, more catches, more yards, and potentially more touchdowns. So these are all guys that I mentioned here. Some you think about adding now, some to keep your eye on for down the road. If you can add them now and hide them in a roster spot, you might be thanking me later for it. But these are the guys right here that can really make a difference for you as your season goes along and really help you make some hay, get into the fantasy playoffs, and hopefully help you win fantasy championships.